This is Matthew Cratter from Trade University, and today I want to answer the question, will Ethereum break like Terra Luna? We remember what happened to Terra Luna back in May of this year of 2022, and I want to make the argument that something similar could happen to Ethereum and other proof-of-stake protocols. So if we take a look at staking in Ethereum, there's currently about $22 billion that are staked, and they are protecting a market cap of approximately 160 billion. Now, currently you cannot withdraw your staked ETH. The code for this has not even been written. There's some hope that it's going to be written by March of 2023, and the Ethereum developers will stop keeping stakers hostage. We'll see what happens with that. As we said, though, we have a certain amount of ETH that's securing a certain amount of value on the Ethereum network. Today, that $22 billion worth of ETH that's staked provides security to the network. And the way it does that, because if you're a validator, if you're a staker, and you get to validate the next block, and you do something naughty, then your staked ETH gets slashed. So let's assume that Ethereum does the right thing, and they enable withdrawals from staking in March of 2023. Quick side note, why should Ethereum enable withdrawals? Because otherwise, if they don't, they're basically just another Celsius or BlockFi that has decided to freeze withdrawals and hold their depositors captive. So let's assume that Ethereum devs do finally write the code to enable you to withdraw your ETH in March of 2023. And then let's also make the assumption that because of Fed policy or more crypto contagion, that between now and March of 2023, ETH falls another 50% to $660 per coin. Again, this is just a thought experiment. That's not my prediction, though anything can certainly happen in the world of the Fed and the world of crypto. So if ETH is down another 50% from where it is today, it's trading at roughly 1,300 today. Do you think there are going to be more people or fewer people who seek to withdraw their ETH once they're finally able to, once withdrawals are allowed? Clearly, many more people will want to withdraw and get their money back. Could they be tempted by a higher staking yield? I think possibly, but the question you always have to ask yourself is, if you're in a bank that's going under, what interest rate is acceptable? If your bank is going under, are you willing to accept a 10% CD interest rate just to keep you around? I think the answer is no. And the comparison as well is, what staking yield would you have required to keep your money with Do Kwon or Mashinsky on Celsius? So we have this really weird dynamic where the more ETH's price falls, the more people will want to unstake and get their money back. I don't think this looks like a stable system. At least it doesn't to me. It looks a lot more like Do Kwon's Terra Luna. Now, Terra Luna and UST, which was their stablecoin, had slightly different dynamics. But what we're examining here is we're not comparing ETH to an algorithmic stablecoin, but we're saying what happens if the price moves a lot, in what direction, how fragile or robust is the system. And it looks, at least from this example, it really looks to me like Ethereum's security is actually dependent on the price of ETH. Or maybe, if this isn't true, maybe Ethereum's security is dependent on people's faith in Vitalik, on people's faith in the ETH devs to enable withdrawals. But I think that putting faith in a person or a group of people makes a coin a very fragile system as well. So this would be even worse. And this was, of course, the problem with FTX. FTX was ultimately dependent on people's faith in Sam Bankman-Fried, and Terra Luna was ultimately dependent on people's faith in Do Kwon, and both stories ended really badly for investors. So we're going to hope that Ethereum's real security is dependent on the price of ETH. But again, this causes problems, and you could have some sort of death spiral, similar in its own way to Terra Luna. If you're finding this video helpful so far, I just ask you to hit the subscribe and like buttons to help to support the channel. Now let's do a similar analysis for Bitcoin and think about Bitcoin's security. I'm going to start with two charts. The last time that Bitcoin was at 17,000, which is approximately where it is today, 17,000, 18,000, was back in 2020 and 2017. So we can see here we're trading at 17.9 as I'm recording this, and the last two times we touched this were back in November of 2020 and then in December of 2017. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at the hash rate and you go back and look at December 17th of December 2017 and also November 2020, you can see that the hash rate today, even though we're at a much higher price for Bitcoin, the hash rate is much higher. So Bitcoin's price has gone basically nowhere since 2017, as altcoiners like to point out. And yet here's a funny fact. Its security, in other words, its hash rate of the network, has gone from 14 million terahashes per second in 2017 to 216 million terahashes per second today in December of 2022. Now, I would say that that's quite surprising and quite counterintuitive, because if Bitcoin is a dying protocol, it's going nowhere. Why do more and more people want to mine it? Or why do they want to design machines and complex semiconductor chips to mine it? Here's something else. Bitcoin's price peaked. If we're going to do this comparison to Ethereum falling 50%, Bitcoin's price peaked obviously in November of 2021 at about 69,000. Today it's at roughly 17,000. So Bitcoin's price has fallen approximately 75%. And yet if you look at the hash rate has moved up from 166 million terahashes back in November of 2021 to 260 million terahashes today. So I would say that this looks like a much more robust and secure system than Ethereum's proof of stake, because we have an example here where Bitcoin's price has fallen 75% and yet the security is just fine. In other words, the hash rate is actually much higher than where it was back in November of 2021. So this is the problem with Ethereum's proof of stake. Just like Terra Luna, it has this bank run potential. It's not quite like a bank run, a partially reserved bank or a fractionally reserved bank, but it does have similar dynamics where if the price falls, you can end up with a death spiral. And this just doesn't happen in Bitcoin because of the difficulty adjustment, as we've talked about in previous videos. So I'll ask you a question. Do you sleep well at night? Will you sleep well at night owning ETH and knowing how fragile the security mechanism is? And I'd also make a note here to regulators, to the SEC. Are you going to let retail investors get wrecked again? This is really, all of these proof of stake protocols really need to be looked into quite closely by the SEC and other regulators, because I believe they're very unstable. Let's think a little bit more about Bitcoin's security budget. Let's say that you've got billions of dollars tied up in ASICs, which are these specialized Bitcoin hardware mining machines. Highly specialized Bitcoin mining machines that can only do one thing, which is to do SHA-256 hashes. They plug in a number, they do a hash, they plug in a number, they do a hash. This is what Bitcoin mining is, where you're trying to produce a hash with a certain number of leading zeros. So let's say you're a Bitcoin mining company, which is a very difficult business to be in, and you end up going bankrupt. What this means is that someone else, either your creditors, your bondholders, or maybe even the local electric utility company, if you owe them some money, they get their hands on your ASICs, on your Bitcoin mining machines. So what happens next? Well, maybe they dump these ASICs on the equivalent of eBay, or maybe they plug them in and start mining some Bitcoin and thus start providing security again to the Bitcoin network. So the Bitcoin mining company goes bankrupt, but whoever gets their hands on the ASICs is quite likely going to plug them back in again if they can, or they're going to sell them to someone who can. If they dump them on eBay, then someone else buys them and plugs them in and starts mining Bitcoin. And again, the price of the ASICs, maybe they've even fallen 90% from where the original company purchased them, but the ASICs are still the same ASICs. They have the same hashing power, the same efficiency, etc., and they can be used to mine Bitcoin. And they're just as good, especially if they're a brand new machine and they've only been mining for a few months. They have a lifespan of, call it 6 years or so. They're still perfectly good, even though the person paid $9,000 for the ASIC, or the Bitcoin mining company paid $9,000 for the mining for the ASIC, and it's now worth $1,000. It's gone down quite a bit in price, but it's still the same machine that provides the same security to the Bitcoin network. So let's now assume that Bitcoin falls 50% between now and March 2023. It falls to 8,500. Again, this is a thought experiment. I don't think we go that low. Just like ETH in our example, Bitcoin has fallen 50%. So what has happened to Bitcoin's security budget when the price has gone down? Well, you still have all of those ASICs sitting somewhere in the world, and they can only be used for one thing, which is to mine Bitcoin. If you're a profit-minded investor, you're going to mine Bitcoin as long as it's profitable. If the profitability goes down and enough ASICs unplug, Bitcoin's difficulty adjustment is going to kick in, make it easier to mine a block, to mine the next block. And so that will help If you're not a profit-minded investor and you decide to or if you're not profitable but you're interested in being profitable and you're having problems, you just give up, you sell your ASICs on eBay, and then let's say it gets bought by someone who has lots of low-cost energy and needs to get their hands on some cold hard cash. Maybe it gets bought by someone in Russia or someone in Venezuela, and it could even be a government, and they might be willing to mine Bitcoin at a loss. Or they have such a low cost of electricity that they don't really care what price Bitcoin is trading at. Your ASICs could also get bought, your used ASICs could also get bought by ExxonMobil, who might use it to mine, to use it on stranded natural gas that would otherwise get vented or burned. And I'll link to an article below about how ExxonMobil is doing this. So this is becoming, Bitcoin mining is obviously becoming a very mainstream accepted thing, even by S&P 500 large market cap companies. But it actually gets even better for Bitcoin security, because let's look at the ASIC manufacturers themselves. When you buy a new ASIC from Bitmain or MicroBT or one of these big companies, and there are really only a few at this point, the capital that you spend goes both into making the ASIC itself, but it also goes to the parent company itself in the form of some gross margin or ultimately net margin. And that profit margin gets redeployed into ASIC chip research and development, R&D, which then goes on to make the next generation of ASICs even more powerful and efficient. In other words, they can produce more hashes per second using less electricity. Now remember, we're talking about machines that can be only used to do one thing, which is to run SHA-256 hashes and thus to mine Bitcoin. So do you see what's happening? This capital that gets deployed into Bitcoin mining gets recycled back into making Bitcoin even more secure by increasing its hash rate and the efficiency of its miners at the level of the parent company that makes these ASICs. By contrast, capital deployed into staking on Ethereum, once it can be withdrawn, once it's allowed to be withdrawn, can be withdrawn at any time. And so you have a problem here. If Ethereum were ever to hit, let's say, $100 trillion market cap, you can be sure that you would need at least $13 trillion to secure the protocol under proof of stake. That's currently the percentage that it's at right now, at about 13%. So you need $13 trillion, which is a tremendous amount of money, especially when you compare it to large nation states' GDP. Security costs for proof of stake scaled linearly with the amount of value being secured. And this is a huge problem you'll never hear Vitalik talk about. This is a problem because money tied up in Ethereum staking could be used for much more useful things. It could be used to build wind and solar farms. If you're really into Ethereum for the environmental impact, why not use that capital instead of just putting it into a smart contract on Ethereum? Why not use that same capital to build a wind farm or a solar farm or a nuclear power plant, which have very low to zero carbon emissions, and make the world a better place in that way? So there's this huge opportunity cost for the world to tie up capital in staking contracts. It's not a great use of capital. By contrast, if Bitcoin ever hits $100 trillion market cap, and I think it has a much more likely chance of doing this than any other coin out there, certainly much higher chance than Ethereum. And when people talk about Ethereum flipping Bitcoin, they never go into these granular details, which really, really matter. And that's because Ethereum people do not think like engineers. They have very poor engineering in their protocol. So by contrast, if Bitcoin ever hits $100 trillion market cap, it's quite likely that it will need far less than 13 trillion to secure the protocol, because Bitcoin runs on proof of work. And security costs do not scale linearly for proof of work. Thanks to Moore's law, even if you hold electricity costs constant or they go up slightly, you get more and more power securing the network as ASIC manufacturers constantly improve the product. So what's my point? Capital staked on ETH can be withdrawn at a moment's notice once they enable those withdrawals. That makes ETH inherently unstable, just like Terra Luna or FTT, which was the air token from Sam Bankman-Fried's FTX. Capital, by contrast, capital moved into Bitcoin mining. ASICs can only do one thing, which is to mine Bitcoin. Now, technically, I know this is going to come in the comments, technically you could also mine Bcash or BSV or any other SHA-256 coin, but these are cryptos that continue to lose value against Bitcoin. and they now have very tiny market caps compared to Bitcoin. They've basically lost the hard fork wars. And so the only practical thing to do with these ASICs, obviously there'll always be a very, very small percentage that's mining Bcash or BSV, at least until those two coins really completely die. But the majority of this hashing power, the majority of these ASICs, are only going to be mining Bitcoin. If 2022 has taught us anything, it's that poorly engineered crypto protocols can blow up on a moment's notice in spectacular fashion. And I believe, as I've said, that any crypto that runs on proof of stake is subject to these same bank run dynamics. You can't have the same sort of bank run when you're talking about ASICs, because these ASICs are never destroyed. Maybe some are destroyed by an act of God. There's a flood, there's a fire, there's a hurricane or something. But the majority of them, they stick around for their usable life. And then those profit margins get recycled at the parent company level into making more and more powerful ASICs. Now, crypto that runs on proof of stake is subject to bank run dynamics, and I do not think that this is something that can be prevented by fancy software code or rhetorical assurances by Vitalik. And I'll just ask you, why do you think that Ethereum has not yet enabled withdrawals? Do you really think they're going to enable them in March of 2023? I have a feeling this is going to be pushed out. Ethereum has made so many poor engineering choices that it is now unquestionably doomed as a protocol. It is going to end in the same way that Terra Luna ended. And it's going to be, I don't know if it's going to end with a whimper or a bang, but the problem is you cannot secure things with fancy software. Much better to secure them with what Michael Saylor calls a wall of encrypted energy. The only question about Ethereum is whether it blows up in March of 2023 or a bit later. And so I'd ask you, if you're an institutional investor, if you're a large high net worth investor who holds ETH, just imagine what it's going to feel like to be the next Three Arrows Capital, which obviously had a lot of Terra Luna on their balance sheet. If you're managing other people's money, have you decided which jurisdiction to flee to when Ethereum blows up in the same way that Suzu and Kyle Davies and Three Arrows Capital blew up? If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. I'm especially interested if you have thoughts on proof of work and proof of stake, how they scale linearly or otherwise when they're securing large amounts of capital, and how exactly can we think about Bitcoin's security budget. I think this is something that I'm still fleshing out the details, and it's a really, really interesting question to analyze. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.